The Xyralian palace shimmered like a suspended nebula, its crystalline pillars pulsing with faint bioluminescent light, as though the building itself were breathing. Within its echoing corridors, Queen Zelura moved with the controlled poise of someone accustomed to command, yet her eyes, slitted, violet, and sharp enough to cut, betrayed an exhaustion few dared mention. For 2 months, her palace had felt less like the heart of an empire and more like a battleground of shattered hopes and smoldering frustration. 15 nannies had walked through its doors, and 15 nannies had fled in terror or humiliation long before their contracts reached a single moon cycle. The cause of this relentless churn now sat hunched in the center of the royal nursery, tiny shoulders trembling as a ring of floating toys orbited above her in erratic, jittering bursts of telekinetic energy. Princess Kiralyn was 4 years old and small even by Xyralian standards, with luminescent skin that flickered uncontrollably with each wave of emotion. Her face was scrunched in concentration, though her rising panic was palpable, warping the air around her into ripples of unstable force. One toy blinked out of existence entirely, reduced to particles by a surge she did not mean to unleash. Zelura watched from the doorway, her claws curling against her palms. Her daughter was powerful, too powerful, and the slightest fear or frustration could twist her abilities into volatile storms. A ruler descended from warriors could not afford to show fear, but a mother had no such armor to hide behind. Despite her best efforts, she felt helpless. She could subdue an invading fleet, but she could not soothe a crying child whose power threatened to crack the palace walls. A faint tremor rippled through the floor as Kira's panic escalated. Somewhere behind Zelura, palace guards shifted nervously, ready to intervene with containment fields. But those had failed before. Everything had failed before. Then, unexpectedly, a soft voice approached from the far end of the corridor. "Excuse me, Your Majesty, there's water all over Hall 7 again, so I'm just passing through to reach the maintenance closet." Chong, the human janitor, rounded the corner carrying a battered utility case. Humans were a rare sight in the Empire and typically relegated to labor tasks, fragile, physically limited, lacking the grandeur or telepathic traditions Xyralians respected. Yet Chong moved with quiet competence, the kind of presence that drew no attention until necessity demanded it. He slowed when he sensed the crackling pressure in the air, and his eyes shifted toward the distressed princess. "She's having another episode," one guard muttered, almost resentful of how calmly Chong looked upon the chaos. Zelura was about to command him to retreat when Kira released a shrill, frightened cry. The levitating toys dropped, then shot upward again in a wild spiral. The pulse of telekinesis struck a nearby column, fracturing it with a sharp crack. The guards tensed, preparing containment. Before anyone could react, Chong stepped past them. His movements were slow, deliberate, an approach one might use toward an injured animal, not a royal child whose uncontrolled powers could tear a hole through the ceiling. "Kira," he said softly, voice lowering into a tone that seemed impossibly warm amid the brittle tension. "Hey now. Deep breaths. Like this." He knelt several steps away from her, close enough to be a presence, but far enough not to overwhelm her. He placed one hand on his chest, inhaled visibly, then exhaled. She hesitated, confused by his lack of fear. No one had ever approached her like that. No force fields. No shrieking. No panic. Just calm, steady breathing. The toys wobbled in the air. The crackling of unstable power softened into a faint rumble. Chong inhaled again, slower this time. "You're not in trouble," he murmured. "You're scared. That's okay. It's just us here. Follow my breath." Kira's luminous eyes widened. She tried to inhale the way he did. Her small chest hitched, then steadied. The toys dropped to the floor one by one, clattering harmlessly. The nursery's lights steadied. The air pressure settled back into something breathable. The silence that followed was almost sacred. Chong gave her a gentle smile. "See? There you go." For a moment, Kira studied him as though seeing something alien, yet comforting, for the first time. Her fingers flexed. The glow beneath her skin dimmed to a soft shimmer. She reached out and touched his sleeve, as if anchoring herself to something safe. Behind them, the guards stared in stunned disbelief. Zelyra's breath hitched, a rare, unguarded moment. She had witnessed mastery in many forms: combat, diplomacy, strategy. But this quiet human, kneeling on a cracked floor with his mop bucket nearby, had achieved something none of her elites had managed in weeks. Chang straightened slowly, not breaking the child's gaze until she seemed fully calm. Then he stepped back respectfully and turned to leave. "Apologies for interrupting, Your Majesty. I'll clear the hall quickly and stay out of the nursery wing." Zelyra found herself speaking before she could think. "Stop." He froze. The guards exchanged glances, unsure whether he was about to be rewarded or vaporized. Zelyra walked toward him, her stride measured, her mind racing. For 2 months, she had watched specialists, scholars, and trained caretakers crumble under the weight of her daughter's instability. And this janitor had walked in without flinching and restored peace within moments. When she stood before him, her voice was low but unwavering.
"Chang."
"Report to the throne chamber at first light."
He blinked.
"Your Majesty? Did I do something wrong?" Kira tugged at her mother's hand, her voice still small but steady. "Mama," he helped. Zelyra's gaze softened by a fraction, though her authority never wavered. "You did something none of my people have accomplished in weeks." Her claws tapped lightly against her ceremonial belt, a sign of deep contemplation. "And unless I am gravely mistaken, you may be the one person in this palace my daughter listens to." The realization settled over the room like the final piece of a long unsolved puzzle. Chang stared at her in disbelief, not yet grasping the consequences of the moment. The guards stood frozen, unsure how to react to the queen's tone. And Kira, now calm, clung to her mother's arm but kept glancing at the human who had soothed the storm inside her. Zelyra inclined her head slightly. "Attend the throne chamber tomorrow. We have much to discuss." She turned away before he could protest, already knowing that this small human might change the course of her daughter's future, perhaps even the Empire's. And though Chang did not yet understand what he was walking into, the faint tremor in his hands revealed that he sensed the gravity of what lay ahead. As he left the nursery, the shattered columns still humming with leftover energy, one thought lingered in the air between them all. The impossible had happened, and nothing in the palace would remain the same. Chang arrived at the throne chamber the next morning carrying an anxious stillness, the kind a man wears when he senses his life is about to twist in a direction he never intended. The chamber's towering arches glowed with coiling threads of bioluminescent silver, illuminating Queen Zelyra seated upon her elevated throne. Her expression was unreadable as always, commanding, elegant, and edged with a quiet intensity. What unsettled Chang was not her power, but the knowledge that she had summoned him for something beyond cleaning spilled water or repairing condensers. Kira sat beside her mother, legs dangling, eyes bright with a fragile hope she barely knew how to name. When she spotted Chang, she straightened, almost shy, as though uncertain whether she should greet him. He gave her a small nod, and her skin brightened with a soft ripple of blue. Zelyra dismissed the guards with a wave of her hand. Once their heavy footsteps faded, she rose and stepped down from the platform, each movement controlled but uncharacteristically hesitant. "Chang," she began, "I require your service in a capacity no human has been asked to fill within my reign." He swallowed. "Your Majesty, I'm grateful you think I helped yesterday, but I'm not trained for anything beyond maintenance. I don't want to cause trouble." "You prevented disaster," she replied. "You calmed my daughter when seasoned specialists could not." She studied him with a piercing deliberation. "I am appointing you as her caretaker. Temporary for now, but with full authority in her daily training." The declaration hit him like a physical force. "Caretaker?
Me?"
I don't know anything about Zyralian education. I'm not even a parent anymore." His voice broke at the edge of the sentence, and he closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. Zelyra's expression softened with a flicker of understanding, a rare glimpse beneath her regal armor. She stepped closer. Your lack of arrogance is part of the reason I chose you. Kira reached for him, her small hand extending like a quiet plea. You helped me breathe, she murmured. That simple statement disarmed him more effectively than any royal command. He crouched to meet her eyes. If I do this, I have one condition, he said gently. No intimidating equipment. No force fields. I need her to trust me, not fear the palace. Zelyra hesitated, then nodded once. Agreed. By midday, the palace was buzzing with disbelief. A human, assigned to childcare for the imperial heir? It bordered on scandal. Courtiers whispered in balconies, nobles exchanged offended glances, and members of the High Council circulated a petition demanding Zelyra reconsider. But the queen's authority was ironbound, and her proclamation stood. Chang's new quarters were adjacent to the nursery. When he arrived for his first lesson with Kira, he found a dozen servants scrambling to remove sharp-edged decor and deactivate unnecessary sensors, orders he knew the queen had issued on his behalf. The small gesture unsettled him in a way he could not explain. Kira waited at the center of the room, anxiously folding the hem of her tunic. Her glow flickered like a candle exposed to wind. Hey, kiddo, Chang said softly. Ready to start? She nodded, though her voice trembled. I break things. Then we learn how not to, he answered, settling onto the floor. It's just practice. Their first sessions were simple. He taught her grounding techniques he once used to help his late daughter through emotional swings, matching breaths, tracing shapes in the air, and focusing on physical sensations rather than the swirl of panic inside. Kira tried each exercise with earnest concentration, her glow stabilizing every time she managed a calm inhale. Her telekinetic tremors reduced from chaotic bursts to faint twitches, then to stillness. By the end of the first hour, she was smiling. A real smile, unburdened, soft, and utterly transformative. Zelyra watched through a transparent partition, her posture rigid with an emotion she struggled to contain. To see her daughter calm, laughing, not merely controlled, felt like a miracle she hardly dared believe. Chang remained unaware of her presence, wholly focused on Kira. He spoke to her as though she were simply a child, not a political heir or a symbol of power. That unfamiliar normalcy was what soothed her most. But outside their quiet bubble, pressure mounted. High Counselor Mitrax cornered Zelyra in a side corridor later that evening, tone venomous behind his respectful bow. Your Majesty, placing the Empire's future in the hands of a human laborer invites instability. You weaken your lineage. You weaken yourself. Zelyra's gaze hardened. He stabilized the princess when your trained experts failed. A lucky anomaly, Mitrax countered. Humans are unpredictable, fragile, and he is a widower, emotionally compromised, hardly fit for the responsibility of shaping a royal mind. The insult cut deeper than she expected. Her claws tightened. Do not mistake compassion for weakness. He bent his head slightly, a mockery of deference. We shall see how long your experiment survives scrutiny. When he left, the corridor felt colder. Meanwhile, Chang and Kira continued their lessons. He introduced a routine: morning breathing, midday emotional vocabulary, evening calm-down stories. She responded with remarkable speed, eager to please him, eager to trust someone who saw her as more than her uncontrollable gift. One afternoon, while practicing focus, a tremor of power surged unexpectedly through her palms. It crackled with dangerous energy, but she froze instead of panicking, terrified she might hurt him. Chang immediately raised his hands. It's okay. Don't fight it. Let's breathe through it. She clung to his voice, stabilized, and released the energy in a contained pulse that fluttered harmlessly against the air. When it dissipated, she burst into tears, overwhelmed not by failure but by relief. Chang held her while she sobbed, murmuring the same steady reassurance he once gave his own daughter. Zelyra stepped into the room moments later, drawn by the emotional outpouring. She paused when she saw Kira nestled against Chang's shoulder, small fingers gripping his sleeve, the glow around her dim and peaceful. "Is she hurt?" the queen asked quietly. "No," Chang replied, not shifting from his position. "She just needed a moment." Zellura lowered herself to her daughter's height, her stern composure wavering as she brushed a clawed hand through Kira's hair. "You did well," she whispered. Kira nodded sleepily, then allowed Chang to guide her back to her feet. As she walked to her mother, she turned and offered him a soft, trusting smile. For the first time since her reign began, Zellura felt something unfamiliar toward a human, respect intertwined with something far more delicate. She studied Chang with a searching gaze, realizing he had not simply soothed her child, he had given her hope. Later, as Chang left the nursery for the night, he passed several nobles who glared at him as though he carried a contagion. Their disapproval washed over him like cold air, but he kept walking. His purpose was clear now, even if the Empire despised it. He glanced back at the nursery door before turning the corner, unaware that Zellura was still watching from the shadows, her thoughts drifting into uncertain, dangerous territory. For all her power, she knew one truth more clearly than ever. The stability of her daughter, and perhaps the fate of her empire, now depended on the quiet strength. The night before the Imperial Summit, the palace felt unnervingly still, as though every beam and crystalline pillar braced for something approaching from the shadows. Chang sensed it long before he understood it. Kira had been unusually clingy throughout the day, her glow flickering in anxious patterns she could not explain. Even Queen Zellura had shown signs of unease, pausing too long before answering a guard, scanning corridors with a warrior's sharpened intuition. Something was wrong, but no one yet knew the shape of the threat. When darkness settled fully over the Empire's capital, the High Council made their move. The palace's primary force barriers, the same ones they claimed were malfunctioning earlier that week, shut down in timed sequence, leaving pathways exposed. An elite squad of Council-loyal soldiers slipped through the service tunnels, their armor sound-dampened, and their energy rifles set to destabilize rather than kill. Their mission was simple: extract the princess, frame Zellura for negligence, and place the council in control until a fit regent could be chosen. Chang was finishing Kira's bedtime story when the first tremor shook the nursery wing. The lights flickered. Kira stiffened, her breath catching as she sensed the wrongness in the air. "Something's coming," she whispered, instinct vibrating through her small frame. He moved immediately, scooping her into his arms. "Stay close. We're going to be okay." The corridor outside erupted with muffled shouts. A guard ran past the doorway only to be yanked backward by a stun line, disappearing from sight in an instant. Chang locked the nursery door, though he knew it would buy them seconds at best. The child trembled against him, her luminescent skin flaring with rising panic. Heavy steps approached. The door's security panel hissed, then sparked violently as someone forced an override. Kira's power quivered, spiraling upward in dangerous, uncontrolled crescendos. Chang pressed his forehead gently to hers.
"Hey.
Eyes on me. Remember what we practiced." Her breath hitched. "But Chang, I've got you." The door slid open. 3 armored rebels entered, weapons raised. They ignored Chang entirely at first, focusing on the girl who represented leverage over the throne. But when they advanced, Kira latched onto Chang's tunic in terror, and her power surged outward in a shockwave. The soldiers staggered as the pressure cracked the floor beneath their boots. Chang pivoted, placing himself between her and the intruders. He seized a fallen metal drawer, using it as a makeshift shield, timing each swing, each movement, with a precision born of survival rather than skill. A stun bolt hit the drawer, sending vibrations up his arms, but he held firm. He couldn't overpower them, yet every second he bought was a second Kira regained her breath, her control, her will. "Chang," she cried, reaching toward him as if afraid he would vanish. "I'm right here," he answered, and the steadiness of his voice cut through her panic like sunlight-piercing cloud. The next pulse of her power wasn't chaotic. It rippled outward in a concentrated arc, knocking the nearest soldier backward. The other 2 hesitated, realizing the human they had dismissed was now anchoring the most dangerous child in the Empire. Before they could regroup, a roar split the hallway. Zellura arrived like a storm given form, armor half-donned, her claws shimmering with condensed energy. She tore through the remaining rebels with terrifying efficiency, each strike decisive, her expression a mask of fury. When the last soldier fell unconscious, she rushed to her daughter. Kira flung herself into her mother's arms, shaking. Zellura wrapped her close, murmuring soft words in her native tongue before turning to Chong. "You protected her," she said, voice low but fierce. "At great risk to yourself." He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It wasn't a choice. But the danger was far from over. As alarms blared throughout the palace, Queen Zellura led them toward the throne hall, where she knew the heart of the coup would be beating. They arrived to find half the council already assembled, guarded by defectors who blocked the chamber steps. High Counselor Mitrax stood at the forefront, disdain dripping from every syllable he spoke. "Your rule ends tonight, Zellura," he declared. "You have endangered the Empire by placing trust in a human janitor and allowing your heir to remain an unstable threat. The Council will assume control." Kira clung to Chang's sleeve, eyes blazing with fear and defiance. Chong knelt beside her. "You're not a threat," he whispered. "You're stronger than they know. Breathe with me." She inhaled shakily, and the glow around her steadied. Zellura watched the exchange, her heart pounding with pride, not just in her daughter, but in the human who stood unarmed in the face of treason, drawing stability from compassion instead of power. Mitrax sneered. "Look at this spectacle. The future of our empire cowering behind a human." He never finished the sentence. Kira stepped forward, small chin lifted, her hand in Chang's. "I'm not afraid," she said, voice trembling but resolute. Her power flared, not wildly this time, but with sharp precision. A ripple of telekinetic force swept through the hall, disarming the traitor guards and slamming their weapons to the floor. Zellura advanced instantly, subduing the council rebels in a series of decisive blows, her movements a lethal dance of discipline. When the hall settled into silence, Mitrax was on his knees, glaring up at the queen as if still trying to bend the world to his will. "You doom us with this softness," he spat. "No," Zellura replied, her voice ringing through the chamber like a verdict. "For the first time, my daughter is controlled and safe. The Empire is stronger because she was taught stability by someone who understands grief, fear, and hope, things you consider weakness." Her gaze flicked to Chong. "I hereby name Chong, son of Earth, royal guardian to the imperial heir." Gasps echoed through the hall. Chong froze, stunned, as Kira squeezed his hand with unmistakable joy. Zellura continued, her tone absolute. "For saving the princess, for restoring stability, and for proving that strength is not solely born from blood or heritage, he shall stand at her side, and, by extension, mine." The confessions in her words were subtle, but Chong heard them. The hall heard them. And though the Empire was far from healed, a shift had begun, a crack in centuries of prejudice, a pulse of change rippling through its core. As the rebels were taken into custody and the palace guards reclaimed the throne hall, Zellura stepped close to Chong. She lowered her voice, so only he could hear. "You did more than protect my daughter tonight. You changed the trajectory of an empire." Chong exhaled, exhausted and overwhelmed. "I just didn't want her to be afraid." "That," she replied, "is what makes you worthy." Kira tugged on his sleeve again, leaning against him with weary trust. Zellura's gaze lingered on the two of them, her daughter safe, the human beside her resolute, and for the first time in years, the queen let herself imagine a future shaped not by fear, but by partnership. The night had nearly broken them, yet in surviving it together, something stronger had taken root. And though the dawn had not yet arrived, the path ahead glowed with a faint, unmistakable promise of change.